Welcome back to ESPR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted to be joined by Greg and Niall. This is a big fight breakdown video for the big light heavyweight clash happening in Quebec on January the 13th between Britain's Callum Smith and Russians Artur Beterbiev. Greg, Niall, great to be joined by this one. This fight was originally scheduled to happen in August, I believe. It's been delayed until January, so we've had plenty of time to discuss it, think about who we think is going to win this fight, and the ins and the outs. But really good to be joined by both of you. First thing we're going to go into, gents, is how much of a step up is this for Callum Smith? Obviously, he's only got the one loss on his record, which was against Canelo. We've discussed kind of at length in ESPR how good Callum Smith's resume really is, how good are the names on his resume. And yeah, it's kind of caused a bit of controversy. Noel, I'll go to you first. Like, your thoughts on Callum Smith's resume. Obviously, he's kind of he's had 30 odd fights now. He's been around for a while, former world champion. And how much of a step up is Beterbiev compared to his best win?
Well, I'll put it simply. I think it's the biggest step up possible. I think Beterbiev was the biggest name at 175. So I think compared to his best win, which I think is George Groves, although it was a faded George Groves, and he was carrying an injury, it's still a decent scalp. His resume as a whole kind of isn't the strongest. Callum Smith compared to the talent that he has, and he's 33 now. He's not getting any younger. So overall, it's not the strongest resume for a fighter of his talent that people would like to have. But in terms of a step up from a past his best George Groves, I think this is just, it's a different planet. It's as big as it gets. As I say, Beterbiev is the main man at 175 for me anyway. It's between him and Bivol, obviously for everybody, but yeah, it's light years ahead of anything that he's faced before.
Yeah, well, worth noting as well. This is only Callum Smith's third fight at light heavyweight. When you consider that for your third fight to be in the weight to be against arguably the best in the division is a massive step up. Greg, your thoughts on how much of a step up this is for Callum Smith compared to his previous wins?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's a big step up, guys. I think I'll agree with now. Best win, George Groves. George Groves was in like the twilight of his career, but it was also the most consistent George Groves I would say that he probably fought. Beterbiev, I rank alongside Canelo, but he's got different strengths to Canelo. I don't think Beterbiev's got the skill that Canelo's got, but I think he punches a lot harder than what Canelo does. So when you look at it from that angle, it's a similar step up in terms of Canelo. We know how that one went. That was a real prime Canelo. This is a 38-year-old Artur Beterbiev who has, if you look at his career, I looked at it tonight. I think he's 2013 he began, 10 years a pro, fought 19 times. What's that, 1 point something fights a year? So yeah, it's a big step up, guys, but it's one that I think is within his grasp.
Yeah, and I think, look, now you mentioned there, Callum Smith's 33 years old. Callum Smith's been a pro 11 years now. If you're not ready to step up and fight the best now, it's unlikely that you ever will be. So I don't think you can really blame Callum Smith for taking this fight. He's also, look, he's achieved a lot in his career. He just possibly doesn't have that kind of that elite level fighter who was in his prime on his resume yet. That's really impressive. And that one time he has really stepped up against Canelo Alvarez resulted in quite a dominant loss, if we're being honest. And that fight was a little while ago now. Do you want to discuss Callum Smith's inactivity as well? As we mentioned, he's not just fought a lot recently. Fought Canelo Alvarez December 2020, which obviously resulted in a loss. Returned to the ring September 2021, which was a second round knockout in his favor. Was then out for the ring for 11 months. Returned on the undercard of Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk 2, which was September 2022. And then that's been it. So nearly another 18 months later, before he's been back in the ring. Greg, does it concern you that level of inactivity? just had the two fights since that Canelo Alvarez loss, which was over 3 years ago now. Yeah, any thoughts on how inactive Callum Smith's been?
It's a little concerning, Elliot, but I truly believe nobody wants to fight Callum Smith and nobody wants to fight Artur Beterbiev. I truly believe people don't want to fight them unless they have to, because you know what? They're dangerous and they probably don't attract the most money. Decent money. If you're fighting guys who are capable of knocking you out in one shot, you want well paid for that. And in this day and age, guys are pricing themselves out of fights quite badly. And Callum Smith, he's had the same luck for years. I truly believe that people don't really want to fight him. So I think it's probably brought these two closer together. And yeah, it is a bit of a concern to me, the inactivity, but Beterbiev into the same bracket. Elliot, he's also quite inactive and he's 38 as well. So maybe it will map out nicely. We'll need to wait and see.
Yeah, look, Beterbiev, it's been almost exactly a year since he fought Anthony Yarde in London. So yeah, look, it's two inactive fighters, but two very good fighters as well. One little side point, the fight was originally supposed to happen August the 20th. See, a month or so before that, Beterbiev pulled out of the fight due to an injury. It's been rearranged for January the 13th. I was hoping and was kind of assuming we were then going to see Callum Smith out in an 8-rounder, maybe in September, October time, just to kind of keep busy, kind of get some of the ring rust off before being out in the ring in a big fight in January. Were you expecting that as well? For all we know, he was maybe contract in a position where he wasn't allowed to do that in case he goes out and loses or gets an injury or gets cut. But is that something that you were expecting to? You were hoping to see Callum Smith out in the ring for just for a keep busy fight?
Possibly a decent 10-rounder. I think when a guy's been unified world champion, I don't think a lot of the fans would tolerate an 8-rounder for someone at that level. A 10-rounder, yeah, but again, Elliot, it's probably the same thing. He either was going to get an opponent he was going to blow out inside 3 rounds that the fans wouldn't accept, or he was going to try and fight a guy who priced himself out of the fight. It's a shame that's the way boxing is, but that is the way it is. People don't want to fight guys like Callum Smith and Artur Beterbiev unless they really have to. So
yeah,
I did expect it, but it's not a surprise either.
No, great. Niall, what are your give us your thoughts on Callum Smith's inactivity? Is it a concern to you?
Well, I'll start by saying that if any fighter being inactive for large periods, I don't like. I think it's the old saying, a fighter's worst enemy is time off, and it's not ideal, especially kind of before a fight of this magnitude. But just to kind of piggyback off what Greg said, and without getting too much into a prediction for this fight, Beterbiev's inactivity would be more of a concern for me for him. If you're in his camp, I just think he's been, as Greg said, a pro 10 years, fought 19 times, 20 times. He's been largely inactive, and it's gonna catch up with him now. I think it has to catch up with him soon. He's 38 years old. He's inactive, and it's a lot of injuries too that have caused that inactivity. So if I was, I'd be more concerned about Beterbiev's inactivity, to be honest. Like, as you say, it's going to be a year more or less since he fought Yard, and I know he got the stoppage against Yard, but I don't think he looked good in that Yard fight. He looked kind of rusty, and he got hurt a couple of times. He got the job done eventually, but I just think his inactivity, along with his injuries and his age, is going to catch up with him very soon. Yeah, so Smith would be a concern, but Beterbiev's would be more of a worry for me if I was a Beterbiev fan or in his camp.
Yeah, eventually stopped Anthony Yarde in the 8th round and was down on 2 judges' scorecards at the time. But I agree with you. Wasn't his best performance, but was still a hell of a fight. It was definitely a fight of the year contender for 2023. Moving on, gents. Just want to ask about kind of where you see both of these guys in the light heavyweight rankings. 99% of people, I'm sure, would have Beterbiev and Bivol number 1 or number 2. I'm sure of that. And number 3, I think it's what the light heavyweights division is one of those divisions where it's not star studded. It's maybe not the division it was 4 or 5 years ago in terms of a top 10 full of talent. Alexander Gvozdyk is another name who's been in there with Beterbiev, who's given Beterbiev a good fight. Anthony Yard, who's given Beterbiev a good fight, could be up there. Obviously, Joshua Mbuatsi and Dan Aziz, who are fighting each other in February, are arguably both top 10, maybe. But I want to ask the question to both of you is, assuming Bivol/Beterbiev are your top 2, is Callum Smith your number 3? Niall, I'll go back to you.
It's a weird one because I was looking at the division earlier before we were recording, and outside of the top 2, it's quite a strange division, as you say. It's not that star-studded. I don't want to say weak, but it's definitely not the strongest division in boxing. Surprisingly, you have 2 pound-for-pound talents at 1 and 2. So I think the only thing that Callum Smith is holding Callum Smith back from being number 3 is kind of his body of work at 175. He's fought, what, as you say, twice at light heavyweight, and there's also the likes of Aziz and Buatsi who are about to fight, but they kind of need that win, either whoever gets the win over each other, to solidify their place as number 3. So I suppose in terms of, this might be unpopular, but I think I'd actually favour Callum Smith against Buatsi or Aziz. That might be kind of an unpopular opinion, but in terms of who I'd pick to win that, I'd have obviously Callum Smith then, but the winner of Buatsi Aziz could be number 3. And then, as you say, Gvozdyk, who, although he has a good kind of record from his first kind of stint but pre-retirement, he's only after coming back, so who knows what he has left. So I'd say Callum Smith would be number 3 for me, purely on the fact that I think he'd beat Buatsi or Aziz, and Gvozdyk I don't think is the same man as before. So yeah, number 3 for me, surprisingly.
Would you back Callum Smith to beat Anthony Yard as well then?
Anthony Yard, yeah, I would, and I think he'd beat Anthony Yard quite comfortably. To be honest, I don't rate Yard particularly highly. I'm not saying he's a poor fighter, but I don't think he's up to that standard. To be honest, I'd pick Smith, Aziz, and Buatsi to kind of deal with Anthony Yard. Yeah.
Fair enough, fair enough. No, the big statement. Look, it would be great to kind of have a round robin tournament with British light heavyweights. I think we've got 4 there who are probably in the top 10, and finding out who the best British light heavyweight would be really interesting to know. Greg, is Callum Smith number 3 in your light heavyweight rankings list?
I'll break this down really quickly there. Callum Smith's only loss was to a game plan by Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez knew that Callum Smith's best punch was his left hook. Canelo Alvarez punched his arm till he basically tore the muscle from the bone. What a tactic, but I've never seen it before, but what a tactic. Aside from that, Callum Smith stepped up to light heavyweight. I think Castillo, who he knocked out in the second round, gives anyone a good fight. He's the only guy to stop Castillo is Callum Smith in 4 or 5 defeats. Callum Smith, without a doubt, for me, apart from inactivity, yes, number 3, and quite comfortably.
No, fair enough. It's an interesting debate, and maybe we'll be talking about Callum Smith being number 2 or even number 1 in a couple of weeks' time. Gents, gonna move on to predictions now, and then I wanna just basically ask you, will your winner of this fight Dmitry Bivol for the Undisputed Clash in 2024? Not forgetting, this video is being made before Dmitry Bivol is fighting Lyndon Arthur on December 23rd. Bivol, of course, a heavy favourite in that fight, but we can't guarantee that Bivol is going to win. We are just going with what we probably assume is going to happen, which is the Bivol win. Greg, go with you first. It's a tricky one. Well, I think it's a tricky one personally. I still haven't made up my mind what my prediction is, and I've probably got about 2 minutes to decide. But what is your prediction? We're not too far away from the fight now. Who are you leaning towards?
it's a really, really tough one. Do you know something? The other two, I was supremely confident in one man. Now I'm not sure because there's been a little bit of inactivity. I'm not being harsh because I did call it a master plan, but I did feel that Callum Smith could have maybe done a bit more against Canelo. I've got to go with my gut, Elliot. I think Artur Beterbiev, I've thought this for a long time. I think he's tailor-made for an uppercut. And I think Callum Smith throws a beautiful uppercut. And I just see him walking onto it, and I see Callum Smith sparking him. I don't know why. The fact that it's going to be in Canada concerns me a little bit. But do you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to go out and say Callum Smith knocks him out.
Great, neck on the line. Niall, no pressure, but we're going to you next. It's 1-0 Callum Smith. Are you going to make it 1-1 or 2-0?
I'm actually so relieved that Greg has said that what he said because I fancy Callum Smith here as well. So I'm going to make it 2-0 Callum Smith. I just think I said it when it was first announced. I think Callum Smith does this. He has the size and he has the power to do it. And Beterbiev's inactivity, his age, his injuries, I think are going to catch up with him on one night. You know, so I think Callum Smith stops him. I'll say he stops him in the second half of the fight. You know, he's proven as well that he can be hurt. Beterbiev, you know, he doesn't have a really cast iron jaw. Yard hurt him a couple of times, and Callum Johnson obviously dropped him, so he can be caught. And Smith has the size, the tools to do it, the boxing IQ and the power. So I just think, yeah, I think Callum Smith is catching Beterbiev at the right time here, and he's gonna knock him out, I think. So I can see a Callum Smith stop his second half of the fight.
Fair enough. I think the biggest factor here is Beterbiev's age. He'll actually be nearly 39 by the time this fight happens, and his inactivity as well. However, just one factor for me is that Beterbiev, he's still only had 19 fights. He's not kind of a 50, 60 fight veteran. And I think Beterbiev's got 2, maybe 3 more big performances left in him before he's past his best. And it's a really tricky one, but I'm going to disagree with both of you. I'm going for Beterbiev to stop Callum Smith rounds 9 to 12. However, I think Callum Smith could give Beterbiev his toughest fight of his career so much, which would still be quite an achievement considering the way Beterbiev is kind of blown everyone apart, and won all of his fights by stoppage. But it's tricky. But it's a tricky one. But we're here to give predictions, and no one's allowed to sit on the fence. Final question, gents. Niall, gonna go back to you. Will we see Cam Smith versus Dmitry Bivol in what would be a massive fight, a big undisputed clash in 2024? Do you think we see that fight?
I think we do, and simply because whatever the Saudis want to happen, it's going to happen. They're going to pay the necessary money to make it happen. You know, at the time of recording, we're seeing the card that's happening on Saturday night, the day reckoning, Fury and Usyk next year. So I think, yeah, the Saudis are going to make that happen next year. Thankfully, it's if Beterbiev was to come through, I should say, you know, I know I picked Callum Smith, but if Beterbiev does come through that, it's a dream fight that I do think we'll see happen next year.
Yeah, you've got to think so. I just think there isn't. I'm not sure what obstacles there are. And I just think timing wise as well, one's fighting December 23rd, one's fighting January 13th. Unless Bivol or Beterbiev / Callum Smith pick up an injury or a cut, that's the only potential obstacle I can see happening. Greg, your thoughts? Do you think we see Callum Smith versus Bivol for the undisputed clash in 2023?
I don't see why not, Elliot, and I think it's more likely to happen than Beterbiev and Bivol would, because Eddie Hearn's got an interest in both fighters. The last I checked, I think he still basically calls the rights for Callum Smith. Bivol is on the Day of Reckoning card, which is, although it's a co-promotion, I'm pretty confident that that's an Eddie Hearn thing, that he's on that card. I don't see any obstacles, like you said, so yeah, I think you'll see it happen if Callum Smith prevails.
Fingers crossed. All right, gents, really enjoyed doing that with you. Could be a fight of the year contender for 2024, but yeah, Callum Smith will challenge Artur Beterbiev for his world titles in Quebec, Canada on January the 13th. And it's going to be, it's going to be a hell of a fight. Niall, Greg, thank you very much for joining me. I'll speak to you again soon.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, guys.